Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you on a gem of a knife that was sent in by a viewer. Actually, to review a gem of a human being named Ian has sent this my way and has also given me a lot of other useful information about it. Been really generous, and so I'm really grateful to him for the chance to take a look at this knife. So this is a Benchmade Ritter Edition Mini-Griptilian in AWT, Applied Weapons Technology scales. And the scales are made out of solid aluminum, and so this is kind of a strange review because I'm reviewing two things. First, the Mini-Grip, and second, these scales. And as I'll get around to later, I think that this is the best layout out there for the Mini-Grip. So let me talk a little bit about why. The Mini-Griptilian is available from Benchmade and has been for many years. It's one of the more popular small EDC models, and there's a lot to like. You get good steels, especially on the Ritter. This is M390. You get a good small configuration. It's not too terribly intimidating. But the problem with the Mini-Grip is the scales. These are the stock scales. Don't mind the tape. That's holding it together at the moment. But they're a plasticky kind of thing. The more modern versions, they've got some with G10 now, but they're really expensive, and G10 ain't that much better. And just the design of the scales has always left me really cold. I mean, ergonomically, they're okay. Actually, I'd say they're decent. They're okay. But every time I go to buy a Mini-Grip, I think to myself, yeah, but those scales, and it chases me away. And so when Ian tells me, hey, I got a Mini-Grip with the AWT scales, which is a really common upgrade, I'm all over that, because I'd love to see what this beauty of a knife internals looks like in decent scales. And so that's what we're going to look at today. Your Ritter Mini-Grip with your AWT scales. And as always, we're going to go the good, the bad, and the ugly of this particular little knife. So there's a whole lot of good going on here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the scales and the knife separately so that people can kind of tease apart, oh, well, I just want a Ritter grip. Well, here you go. So first and foremost, this knife is just beautifully smooth. I mean, look at that. That's just the joy of the axis lock right there encapsulated. And part of that's because Ian, the viewer, has taken really excellent care of this knife. Normally when I get a knife, I end up taking it apart, cleaning it up. But this knife came out of the box functioning just beautifully. So my hat's off to you, my friend. And so in that state, it's just beautifully smooth. And that's a big part of that felt quality on your axis lock. And part of the reason the axis is so compelling is to be able to get that mechanical sensation. At least to me, but I'm weird, whatever. But that's a beautiful thing for this knife, and it opens with just centripetal force all day long, no problems. Blade steel is incredible. M390 on your Ritter grip. M390, as I talk a little bit about in my Valet review, is just an incredible steel. It's same thing as 20CV and CTS 204P, but it's just stellar. I got no complaints whatsoever about M390 as a steel. And I hope more and more people start using it. But that adds a bunch of value to going the Ritter route on your Griptilian. Really excellent, excellent steel. And it's coupled with really excellent blade geometry. It's a thin blade, which is great for EDC kinds of tasks. It's got some flat part here, it's got some belly here, and it's got some point here. It's got enough point that it's, you can actually do poking kinds of things with it. But it doesn't have quite so much point that it becomes an oh my god scary murder knife. So that's a beautiful little compromise there. And I think this blade shape is pretty spectacular for EDC, even relative to some of the other options I've really enjoyed in the past. So the geometry is just stellar for pretty much anything an EDC kind of task would want. So that's just nice. So it's a smooth knife with a great blade steel and a great blade shape. And that's beautiful. As for the scales, these are AWT scales, like I said, and the biggest impression that I get off of these scales is that they're solid, and that's a beautiful thing. I mean, they're aluminum, but they're big, thick chunks of aluminum with the liners nested beautifully in there, and that's just nice. The felt quality on these scales is way up there, and that's beautiful, and frankly, it's higher than even like the felt quality on the Benchmade 940 scales. Not the 941, but the 940 comes with aluminum. And this feels even a little more solid than that, just because it's so thick. And I don't know, I really didn't like the coating on the Benchmade version. So solidity is incredible, and overall the fit and finish on the scales is pretty damn good too. I mean, there's very little gap, if anything, between the back spacer, which is nicely anodized here, or powder-coated, I'm not sure which, and the actual knife itself. The lanyard hole is a solid drill through. I hope you can see that. and they align very nicely in there, which again is another good sign of quality. The fit and finish to the knife itself is pretty good. Take a look at the lack of gaps between the liners here and your actual scale itself. That's a sign of some good machining right there. And, you know, just overall, really, really nice. Oh, and they come with their own deep carry clip, which is actually different from your Benchmade deep carry clip. But in some ways, I think a little bit better. You get a little bit more space, and this is a really beefy clip. I don't feel like I could hurt this clip if I wanted to. So these scales just lend this knife just a feeling of incredible solidity, way beyond what your stock Ritter grip scales give you. This always feels cheap and a little chintzy, but these are just... I was job, but you could hammer this through a car door if you wanted to. No, I'm not going to, Ian. Don't worry, your knife is safe. So those are the good things of this particular knife. And these scales are just so solid. The fit and finish is pretty damn good. The color is great. And it's coupled with a really excellent blade and mechanism in there. Let's jump now into the bad here. Only a couple of bad things with this particular knife. First off, there's no choil, no finger choil here. There's a sharpening choil, which I appreciate, but I really want to hold this knife something more like this, and it just doesn't work, because if my finger slips at all, I'm cutting myself on the blade tip here, and, you know, I feel like that's something that would be ergonomically a much nicer thing on this particular knife. And, you know, that's also a problem with your regular grip without the AWT scales, so that's just a function of the knife itself. I wish that there was something like that built into this handle. Another issue is that it does have thumb studs, which, and the thumb studs are in the path of the blade, which limits its utility as a slicer for deep objects. Like if you're going into a big apple or something like that, after a while, whatever you're slicing is going to hang up on your thumb stud here because it's in the path of the blade. That's a real nitpick because that's the case in almost every knife with a thumb stud. That's one of the good arguments for having a spidey hole. But, you know, hey, whatever. Only a small little gripe there. But really, those are the only things... Oh, actually, then the other thing is that there is a bit of side-to-side blade play here. It's not to the extent that it's dangerous, as I've seen on some other knives. But it is definitely, there is that there. And, of course, it's an axis lock, so there's always going to be a little bit of side-to-side blade play, especially if you want that smoothness. But if you're somebody who just can't deal with any blade play at all, then this and pretty much every other axis lock is off the table for you. In terms of the scale, only a couple of things that are really wrong with it. The clip is a bit of a hot spot in the hand ergonomically. As you're holding it, your clip, especially if you really bear down, digs into your palm, and you can see, right there, is where that clip was poking in. Because it's a pretty thick clip. It sticks out a fair amount. Not a big deal, but it's a little bit there. And the ergonomics on these scales are just fine. And that's really the highest praise I can give the ergos here. They're not good. And maybe they're better for somebody else's hands, but for me, the ergos here are just acceptable. It's not so bad that it's bad, but it's not good enough that it's good. They're just there, and that's okay. But again, this isn't a cutting all day, every day sort of knife. This is an EDC, pull it out when you need it, use it when you need it, put it away kind of knife. And in that way, it's more than fine for that. One way they could have improved the ergonomics on these scales, I feel like, is a little bit more contouring. They're already doing this by CNC, and they're clearly able to do contouring, as they do here. But had they kept this contour going around a little bit more, I think it would have made it aesthetically more interesting and would have made it just a nicer knife in the hand. And so I can see that these were kind of tuned, these scales, that is, for getting out quickly with a minimum of machining. And, you know, at the price, okay, I can see it. But I really wish that they'd done a little bit more chamfering here and really rounded this off even, put another plane to make that a little nicer. And then finally, I nitpick here, but, you know, I'm Nick Shabazz. You watch me for the nitpicks. Here we are. I'm hoping you can see it here, but there are actually screws that go into the blade path. There you go. And I'm not a big fan of that on this knife and anything. And Ian actually ran this down and found out that those screws on the stock scales do not go into the blade path. So it's just the case that these AWT scales are a little too thin. And so, but I kind of wish AWT had shipped the shorter screws to go with that. That would have been a nicer little fit and finish thing. But again, that's a complete and total nitpick, and I'm kind of a jerk for even bringing it up. But there it is. So overall, not that much bad with this knife. I wish that there was a finger choil for me on the blade itself, and the thumb stud position is going to screw with things, and it's an axis lock, so there's side-to-side play. And then the ergonomics on the clip, on the scales themselves are just okay. But again, that ain't so bad. So that's the bad, and there ain't that much bad here. Let's go into the ugly. The ugly on this knife ain't actually that ugly, but it's the scales, and specifically the design of the scales. The scales are very good functionally. They're excellent functionally, I'll go that far. The ergos could be a little bit better, but these scales strike me as an engineering solution. If you look at them aesthetically, they're just chunks of aluminum that are contoured minimally enough that you can use it as a Mini-Griptilian. And I'm sure that makes for relatively inexpensive manufacturing, and that's great. But there's not any inspiration here. These aren't artistic in any way, shape, or form. They could have been done artistically for the hand with a slightly better ergonomics, rounding some surfaces maybe. And they could have been done better for the eye. Hire a designer, put a couple of lines in there that would make these a little bit more interesting. I appreciate that they didn't try and mirror the design of the grip, which I really don't care for. But the scales on the whole are just dead neutral. You look at these and you think to yourselves, wow, that's an effective scale for this knife. But that's about it. The color really does help, but I want there to be a little bit more art here. And God, I'm kind of a jerk for even saying that, but it's just, in terms of some of your other knives, these are very, very functional, utilitarian, Spartan, simple, and that's a good thing in a lot of ways. But at least for me, at least for a pretentious jerk like me, who is pretentious enough to carry something like this, that's kind of a little tough for me. But it defines the character of the knife, and in the grand functional scheme of things, the knife is just fine for it. No problems. So really, that's the only ugly, is I wish the scales were a little bit more inspired. The rest of the thing is just a gem, no questions. So what's the final verdict here? The final verdict here is that this is a great little gem of an EDC knife. And it's a beautiful little utilitarian tool, and that's really what this is. With the AWT scales and this really solid mechanism, this is an incredibly solid little knife with great blade, great steel, and great scales. You're just not going to hurt it. And I really like that a lot. And it's very unpretentious. It's very unornamented. It's a functional tool. And again, I respect that. Even if I would have liked to see a little more art in there, for what this is a really great little package. And, you know, so I really respect this knife a lot, and I think it's a great option. The big question is cost. For the Ritter Grip, hey, that's kind of catchy, why not? For the Gritter, you're looking at $130, and that's with your crappy stock scales. And that's an okay price. Again, the scales, come on, guys. Benchmade, you got to do better than that. The AWT scales are $80, and you know, that's fine. But when you combine the AWT scales with this really, really great inner core of the Ritter Grip, you end up with something that's better than the sum of that. And so for $210, this is a pretty decent deal. It's not perfect by any means, nothing is. But it's a damn good deal, and frankly, it's better than $210 spent directly with Benchmade. Your 940s can run in that range, and I feel like this is more solid than your 940, and I don't know, I'm going to get some hate there, but I'd rather carry this than a 940. It just feels a little nicer into my own personal aesthetic. And, you know, just generally, like I said, the math works. This is probably a $210 knife. I wouldn't have any problem with that at all. And although it's probably not going to stick around in my permanent collection because I do like something a little bit more pretentious, it's an absolute gem. I got no problem with that. And even compared to this guy, which is $200 direct from Benchmade, the felt quality is a little better here because, well, the handles were made by somebody who wasn't Benchmade, and Benchmade's no good at making handles. That's not fair. They've done some decent stuff, but it costs millions of dollars when they do it. But, you know, this is just a great little utilitarian knife, and I'm really happy I got a chance to see it. And I really do highly recommend it. If you're looking to get yourself a Griptilian of any kind, whether it's mini or big, this is a great option to do the Ritter Grip with the AWT scales, and you'll get something better than anything Benchmade's got to offer. So one more time, I'd like to thank my viewer Ian for sending this in. I'll be sending it back pretty shortly here. And never would have gotten to see this otherwise. And any of you guys, if you want to send me something that you love and see what I think for some reason, you're more than welcome to do that. I'm happy to do that. And yeah. So overall, your Benchmade Doug Ritter Mini-Grip combined with AWT scales is absolutely a gem. And it's one of the better functional EDC options out there. And I highly recommend you give it a thought next time you're in the market for something in this area. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye now.